What can we expect from U.S.-Russia relations with the new administration, and also in the context of recent phone dialogue between President Trump and President Vladimir Putin?
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you very much. It's hard to say because you have different voices within the administration here in the United States, and Russia has been one of the issues where there's been a very clear divergence between people like the National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, who've been calling for a dialogue with Russia and some kind of maybe grand bargain. And then you have others, including the Secretary of Defense, General Mattis, the ambassador at the UN, Nikki Haley, and others who have said that Russia is a challenge, that the U.S. needs to have a robust response to Russian actions that threaten U.S. interests in Europe. And so we also don't seem to have much of a clear process or a sense of how these disputes are going to be adjudicated within the administration. So it's difficult at this point to predict which approach is ultimately going to win out. At the same time, I think you do have, with the president, a clear inclination to try and have a more productive relationship with Russia than the one that existed by the end of the Obama administration. And you saw that certainly with the phone call and also some of the contacts that members of his team have had with the Kremlin, both before the inauguration and after. At the same time, of course, I think we don't know how events on the ground are going to shape this process of elaborating a policy and shape the relationship. It's worth keeping in mind that both President Obama, President Bush, and even President Clinton started their terms trying to engage Russia and to improve U.S.-Russian relations. And by the time each of them left office, the relationship had gotten quite bad because Moscow and Washington found themselves on different sides of key problems related to European security and the fate of the former Soviet Union, Iraq, counterterrorism, a lot of different issues. And I think there's a real likelihood that you're going to have a similar dynamic this time around. So even if there is a push on the part of some of the senior leadership to try and, even if they wouldn't use the word reset, the relationship with Moscow again, I worry that at the end of the day, you're going to still have this relationship that's characterized by more competition than cooperation, and you're going to have disappointed expectations.
And it's becoming more clear and obvious that the new administration prioritize the Syrian conflict and fight against ISIS in their relations with Russia. What will be your comments?
And it's an idea that Putin and other Russian leaders have floated for a couple of years now. And I think if there is going to be some kind of attempt at cooperation in the short to medium term, that's where it's going to focus. Now that said, there are a number of questions about how that's actually going to work. For one, Russia really hasn't shown much appetite so far for going after ISIS in Syria. Most of Russia's military operations have been directed against various rebel groups of one kind or another who were threatening the government of Bashar al-Assad. They've largely succeeded in consolidating Assad's control over Syria. And while ISIS in Syria and Iraq remain a problem, they don't necessarily represent a threat to the things that Russia cares about. And so I think it's an open question whether Russia is really going to expend energy, resources, and take risks to go after these other pockets of ISIS in places where they don't threaten Assad and where they don't threaten Russia's concrete interests. The other problem with all of this is Iran, which has been a Russian partner in the operations in Syria, but where Trump and people on his team have indicated that they intend to adopt a much harder line. And so how do they reconcile the demands on the one hand for working with all of the forces in Syria and the wider region who are opposed to ISIS, which includes Iran, on the one hand, and on the other, pursue a policy designed to put maximum pressure on Iran over the things that it's doing, both in terms of spreading its regional influence, but also its nuclear and missile programs.
And can you comment about the recent launch of ballistic rockets from Iran, which received very tough reaction from the administration?
I think there's a domestic political dynamic in Iran too, of course, and I think that was part of it. But at the same time, I mean, yes, there's a new American administration that has talked very tough about Iran through the campaign and after. And I think you probably have people in Tehran who are, as to put the shoe on the other foot, putting the American side on notice that they have options, that there are things that they can do to cause trouble, and that if Washington is seeking a confrontation, there are going to be costs.
And when we talk about the regional trends, regional development, Syrian conflict, and Middle East, it's impossible to avoid the U.S.-Turkey relations. What will be your comments about the U.S.-Turkey relations in this new situation?
Yeah, we don't know. You're right that there's been a kind of curious silence when it comes to Turkey. Turkey has played a sort of ambivalent role on the conflict in Syria, and certainly now, since the coup attempt and the subsequent rapprochement with Russia, appears to have gotten on board with the idea of Assad staying in power, but also has not made going after ISIS a major priority. Turkey continues to be more interested in fighting the Kurds, who, at least under the Obama administration, were among the key American allies for carrying out military operations inside Syria. It sounds like Trump has decided to walk back some of the support for the PYD, the Syrian Kurdish group, but at the same time, whether is willing to embrace what is essentially an Islamist government in Ankara as an ally in the campaign against ISIS remains to be seen. And at the same time, the extent to which that government is willing to work with a leadership in the United States that has said some very provocative things about Muslims generally and Islamists in particular.
Okay, and can we expect any changes towards South Caucasus within under the new administration, and especially what kind of dynamic can we see, in your opinion, related to the resolution of frozen conflicts?
Right. So far, I have not seen any indication that this administration is paying much attention to the situation in the South Caucasus. Again, it hasn't been in office for very long, but the things that they have really focused on have been, again, ISIS, Russia, China, well, Mexico. So I don't know what their specific approach to the South Caucasus is going to be, or for that matter, if they're going to have one. Now, certainly, you can imagine that if they decide to adopt a much more confrontational posture vis-a-vis Iran, for example, that's going to have implications for the South Caucasus, given the shared border and given the complicated relationships that, in different ways, both Armenia and Azerbaijan have with Iran. I suppose if there really is an effort to adopt a much more confrontational posture vis-a-vis Tehran, there would be some interest in having support from the governments of the South Caucasus, which would then put the U.S. in the position of having to be involved in the internecine conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh. On the other hand, because of this sort of curious interest in placating Russia that at least some people within the administration seem to have, I think you can also envision a scenario in which the U.S. decides to pull back a little bit because, this is an area where it's closer to Russia, where Russia has clearly expressed strategic interests, and where it's generally not appreciative of the United States playing a larger role. And so if that ends up being a quid pro quo of a kind for having a better relationship with Russia, then I could certainly envision a scenario in which the U.S. decides to let Moscow play more of a central role in managing the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, as well as having a stronger leverage over Georgia. The situation on the ground in Nagorno-Karabakh remains quite tense. I think the fighting last April sent a signal that the status quo, which has been more or less frozen for 20 plus years, is not necessarily sustainable, and that there are people on both sides who are contemplating the use of military force to try and either change the status quo or at the very least to jumpstart a political process. And I think especially if the United States and also France, which is the other member of the Minsk group, or the other co-chair of the Minsk group, are distracted by their own kind of internal problems, and there's less, the international community is less focused on what's happening in Nagorno-Karabakh, that only raises the likelihood that there's going to be renewed fighting. The domestic dynamics in both Yerevan and Baku make contemplating some kind of a deal or some kind of de-escalation difficult. You have economic problems, you have increasing numbers of people protesting against the difficult situation in the country, and I think there are real concerns on the part of the leadership in the two countries about maintaining their own legitimacy, and sometimes playing on nationalist sentiments is an easy way of doing that, but given how volatile the situation on the ground is, it's quite a dangerous game.
There is a 25th anniversary of establishment of diplomatic relations between the United States and Armenia, and United States is one of the biggest provider of assistance to Armenia. How the United States can help Armenia become more secure, more independent, more sovereign, and advanced?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's several things. One, I think the U.S. has to stay involved. Not just in Armenia, but across the entire region. I know there are concerns in Armenia, as in Azerbaijan and Georgia, about Russian intentions and Russian activities. And there's a very strong interest in having a larger international presence, particularly by the United States, both in economic and security terms. So I think the U.S. could do more to communicate that it's not pulling back, that it's going to remain engaged, including on the question of resolving the Nagorno-Karabakh issue. But I mean, that said, I think it's also important to begin, thinking of ways forward on Nagorno-Karabakh, because as we were talking about, the approach that's been dominant for the last 25 years has probably reached its limits, and the likelihood of renewed confrontation is real. I think the OSCE Minsk process has effectively managed the conflict, but it hasn't given either side a path towards resolution. And as long as that's the case, and as long as the domestic environment in Yerevan and Baku is the way that we were discussing it, the danger of escalation is real. So I think the U.S. and the international community need to be more involved with the parties, working out a way forward that can allow them to live together. But it's going to be a big challenge because there are pressing problems closer to home in the U.S. and France and in a number of other European countries as well. So it's a difficult environment. Armenia has a more pluralistic political system than many other states in the former Soviet Union, but at the same time there are concerns about corruption and about human rights and the rest. And I think that the United States, under normal circumstances, has more leverage than just about anyone else to push for the development of civil society, for the relaxation of some of the controls, in part because of the aid that the U.S. provides. Now, under this administration, I don't know whether that is going to be priority. It's going to continue to be a priority. I imagine probably not. But nevertheless, I think if Armenia and all of the countries in the region become more open, more democratic, more transparent, it helps make them more economically competitive. It makes them a more attractive place for foreign companies to do business. And I think it strengthens their resilience against both internal and external threats. So I would hope that the U.S. remains involved and continues having those conversations too.
The situation in Syria since shadowed the situation in Ukraine. What will be your comments about with the new administration and possible rapprochement? What will be your opinion on the situation?
I mean, first I would say that I think the deterioration of U.S.-Russia relations began well before the conflict in Ukraine. And certainly the annexation of Crimea, followed by the Russian intervention in eastern Ukraine exacerbated the crisis in bilateral relations. But that crisis had started much sooner. And underpinning it is these two incompatible visions of European security and where a country like Ukraine fits in it. I do think that there are people working around Trump and possibly Trump himself who think that you can strike some kind of a bargain with Russia on these issues. My worry is that that kind of a bargain would essentially concede that Ukraine belongs to the Russian sphere of influence. And certainly I think there are people in Russia who expect that that's the nature of whatever the bargain is going to look like. Or at the very least, that you have an administration here that prioritizes having good relations with Russia to such an extent that they're not going to push back on Russian activities in neighboring countries to the extent that even the Obama administration did. So the upsurge in fighting in eastern Ukraine that we've seen over the last couple of days, I really think is connected to this, to the perception that the new American administration is not going to mount a concerted response, that there's too much dissension within Europe, and that this represents an opportunity for the Russian-backed separatists to consolidate some of their positions and to step up the pressure on the government of Poroshenko. If this is a pattern that continues repeating itself over the course of months to years, then obviously that sets the stage for a very dangerous crisis in European security, and it's also a very bad situation for Ukraine. I think it's just important to keep in mind that there's a lot that we don't know at this point. The administration has gotten off to a kind of rocky start, and you really do hear different things from different people at different times. So making predictions is always hard, but I think now, in particular, we have to be a little bit humble in assessing our ability to predict the future.
Thank you so much.